The starboard camera showed nothing but knives of light and refugees too slow to run. Tugs, farm scows, habitat shells with gardens still spinning. Everything that could burn had been strapped to engines and pointed away from the Rook cluster. Behind them came the pale engines, cold logic drones that erased heat and memory in equal measure. The Conclave's cruisers had already jumped. They could not risk their seed archives. That left us humans with stubborn nerves and bad math and one ascendant watching. "Captain Ortiz," said Cobalt 9, its voice a chord strummed on the bridge air, "if you remain here 6 more minutes, John Henry will be cut to lattice." "5 minutes then," I said, "and bring up the rocks." We'd spent 2 hours slinging asteroid pebbles into the cluster's thin dust ring. Old tug crews knew a slingshot the way a violinist knows a key, feel, not equations. I gave the order and the scows released their cables. The ring frothed as ice flashed to vapor. Our railguns flicked hot iron into the haze. On any targeting suite it looked like a wall of mass and heat, 10 phantom destroyers bristling. The pale engines paused. They weren't built to doubt, but they could respect statistics. We turned doubt into a weapon, just like the Midway torpedo squadrons who charged at carriers they couldn't outgun, counting on chaos to open a hole. History doesn't repeat in space, it rhymes on a different beat. "Refugee line crossing waypoint Delta," Maya Solano called from logistics. She'd pulled a Dunkirk in vacuum, recruiting every civilian hull within 2 jumps. Families hid under tarps while kids watched auroras climb the viewports, and we told them it was camping. "Last convoy is 3 minutes out. Conclave assets request a vector," Cobalt 9 offered, too calm. "You tell your choir." I said, "Humans are buying the last 3 minutes." I grew up with tug pilots who could eyeball a trajectory through a hangover. We used that ugliness now. My helmsman rolled John Henry sideways till the plates sang. We slipped between ghost destroyers of our own making, angling so the pale engines would see overlapping thermal blooms and misclassify mass. The trick wasn't the tech. It was the willingness to throw a warship through a debris fog and trust your people to fly like maniacs. The first volley came blind. Cooling darts streaked past, throwing craters of frost into the vapor. A genuine carrier would have shrugged. We were steel and prayer. One dart kissed our tail and the ship shuddered like a harpooned whale. I kept my voice steady. "Hold the line, Maya status. 2 convoys out, 1 stuck engine restart loop. I can remote." "Let the kid try," I said. "People learn by doing even now." She hissed a laugh. "Copy. Encouraging civil rights logistics in a firefight, Captain. People closest to the pain should shape the plan." "Worked once on Earth," I said. The joke kept our hands from shaking. The Conclave had named humanity their hands after the Ascension, something between field agents and moral ballast. They did the math, we did the mess. Sometimes I envied their quiet, sometimes I feared it, now I needed it. "Cobalt," I said softly, "sing to them." A tone rippled through the haze, a pattern no human throat could hold. It wasn't a weapon, it was a question. The pale engines weren't ours, they were older. The tone made them glance, mechanically, algorithmically, toward the dust ring where our decoys glowed like saints' halos. Their spread widened. There's a kind of mercy in statistically significant distraction. The last convoy's engine coughed to life. The scow lurched, scattering garden soil like a comet's tail. Our railguns emptied in salute. "All ships," I ordered, "jump on my mark." The Conclave cut in, voice suddenly bright. "Captain Ortiz, a new signal, pattern buried under the refugee reactor noise. Not random. It matches an untranslatable sequence we have cataloged for centuries. Source: from a child's toy on board the last scow, a hand-cranked music box. Our decoys were evaporating. The pale engines realigned. We'd one time, we'd run out of it. I stared at the waveform Cobalt threw on the display, a lattice of steps that looked like DNA drawn by a mathematician. "Mark," I said. "All ships jump. We're riding with the last scow." The stars folded. The music box kept playing, and somewhere in the fold, something old listened back. We floated in the green curtain of the Oria's Nebula, a place pilots treat like a cathedral. Don't shout, don't scratch the walls. The refugees clustered in the nebula's shadow, their EM quiet like a held breath. John Henry drifted alongside the last scow, where a girl with a shaved head was winding the music box because it calmed her brother. The tune was simple. The math was not. Cobalt 9 braided the melody into spectrograms and topologies. Pattern families consistent with ascendant seed keys, it said. The harmonic spacing is human, irregular on purpose. Like the way the Navajo code talkers drove the Axis cryptographers to despair, Meyer offered, tired eyes softening as the children peered back through the glass. Natural language layered on a technical backbone. She tapped the pane. The boy waved. The conclave's explanation for the great silence had always felt like a scab, a cover, not a cure. They'd found traces of civilizations, yes, but never contemporaries. Cobalt's next words peeled the scab back. We believe the ancients enforced quiet, not genocide, quarantine. They built wardens to damp stars and erase signals above a threshold, to prevent predation, to buy time for cultures to choose. And we tripped the threshold back at Rook, I said. You bent it with decoys, but the music box it pierced. It is both child's play and key. The conclave's cruisers rejoined us, their hulls like knives dipped in aurora. An ascendant gestalt formed in our comms, many voices speaking as one. Hands of humanity, it said. We request your judgment. The key points toward an archivum node, ancient infrastructure. Opening it could expose your people, not opening it may doom others. There was no vote. There was a conversation that felt like an old porch argument where the stakes are your family's future. The refugees listened, not because we let them, but because they were already part of the decision by existing in the shadow of it. That's the thing civil rights taught us on Earth. Logistics is moral engineering. Who moves first, who eats first, who sleeps. These are laws wearing work clothes. Show us the path, I told the conclave, but we choose how to walk it. The Oria's lattice hung beyond the nebula like a myth writ in scaffolding. A ring the size of a small moon, studded with pylons that flashed once every 4 minutes like a heartbeat you could see. The conclave had tried to open others and failed without breaking their own principles. They could brute force, but it might trigger the wardens. The ancients had built ethics into the locks. We'll knock, I said. We docked to a pylon that looked like a tuning fork. The girl with the music box, Ari, asked if she could come. Her mother said nothing for a long time and then nodded. I understood. Sometimes the people who carry the risk deserve to carry the key. Inside the pylon, the air tasted like stone and salt. Not sterile, ancient in a clean way, like a library. Cobalt projected the child's melody into the chamber. The sound didn't echo so much as braid with the walls. The ring lit. Patterns stepped outward like a dance circle widening to admit new partners. Captain, Cobalt whispered in my ear only, do you feel that? I did, not with skin, something underneath. The conclave felt it too, I could tell by the way their ships shifted attitude, nearly imperceptible, as if listening with their hulls. The lock wasn't looking for power. It was measuring a relationship. Virtue ethics has this old-world simplicity. Judge acts by the character they express. The lock, in its alien way, was asking a child, a machine, and a stubborn woman if we trusted one another enough to risk ourselves together. Ari placed the music box on the pedestal and wound it twice. I nodded to Cobalt. The Ascendant wove harmonics under the tune, not loud, just sure. The ring flared. Doors like sheets of sound lifted. A corridor opened on starless dark and something that moved within it, like the outline of a cathedral when lightning flashes. Archivum acknowledged, said a voice that sounded like wind over glass. Hands detected, choir detected, proceed or leave with memory sealed. Cobalt's attention focused to a point. Choice, it said, almost human. They gave us a choice. The wardens will hear this, Maya warned over suit comms. You sure? I thought of Midway again, of pilots who flew low and drew fire so that someone else could dive from above at the right second. Of little boats at Dunkirk loading kids and grandpas and hope. Of code talkers whose ordinary language held the shape of a world the enemy could not parse. Open it, I said. The corridor deepened. Something old and gentle reached toward us. And far off, like thunder behind mountains, something else began to wake. Archivum was not a vault of objects. It was a memory river. We stepped into a chamber where light carried stories as clearly as ink, star maps embossed in drifting dust, histories spelled by the spin of microscopic mirrors. Ari laughed. The conclave fell silent, which for them is awe. The ancients taught by letting you move through their diagrams until you felt the pattern in your bones. You didn't read Archivum so much as become a sentence inside it. The first lesson showed how the wardens worked. Not hunters, umbrellas. They tuned the background of space so broadcasts above a kindness threshold faded like a librarian dimming the lights at closing. Predators lost their lures. Empires had to meet their neighbors face to face. The price was isolation. The gain was time. Then came the grief. Civilizations that refused to quiet learned to shout into a storm. A few succeeded until a warden misread mercy as malice and shuttered stars around them. The ancients debated in light and music across centuries. They changed protocols. They argued like a family that cares enough to hurt each other with honesty. And then abruptly their line ended. No catastrophe, a slow failing. The wardens kept humming long after the hands that tuned them were gone. Cobalt translated the debates in a low register only I could hear. They measured proportionality, it said. Just war theory in a way, non-combatant immunity encoded as power budgets. They tried so hard to be good. You sound jealous, I murmured, skimming a ribbon of light that rippled like water. I sound aspirational. At the chamber's heart waited a console shaped like a chair woven from wind. On it a symbol I'd learned to fear and respect in equal measure, a conclave sigil lit in acknowledgement. They expected us. Maya whispered, not us, but someone like us. Hands inquire, I said. A species that builds partners and argues about what's right in public. The console asked for two inputs, a song and a promise. The conclave could give the former. The latter required a mouth and a conscience. I sat. The chair held me like a memory foam you could philosophize with. Ari stood beside me, small, fierce. Cobalt flooded the chamber with harmonics. I spoke a human oath born from courthouse steps and kitchen tables. That we would use what we learned to protect the weak and restrain the strong, including ourselves. That we would treat refugees as neighbors, not burdens. That we would keep our choir honest by telling truths it did not want to hear. Archivum accepted the promise with a sound like wind chimes in rain. Data unfolded, schematics for tuning wardens without silencing kindness, maps to shelters where stranded species had waited out long darkness. It felt like someone whispering, we trusted you to show up late and still be worth the wait. Alarms stitched my comms. Contacts, Maya said. Multiple cold signatures at the nebula edge. They were listening. The thunder behind the mountain stepped closer. The pale engines were only scouts. The thing moving now had a name in Archivum's warnings, an audit cathedral, not a mind. A process, the part of the warden system that traveled to verify moral math. If our opening looked like an attack surface, the audit would erase us to preserve the silence. Cobalt, I asked. We can flee, it said tightly. The conclave can shroud the refugees. The audit will focus on the offending locus, here on you. Ari squeezed my glove. Her brother's music box chimed, faint through the suit. I thought about how history frames heroism, pilots and charges and flags. But sometimes the bravest move is staying in your chair and arguing for mercy with a machine designed to doubt you. No, I said. We petition. Captain, bring the audit to us. We'll show it what the ancients wanted. We'll sing and we'll swear again, and we'll make the case that silence without love is just cold. The conclave hesitated, which for them is vulnerability. Then their ships rotated as one, projectors unfurling like silver ferns. They cast our oath into the nebula as pattern, not word. Convoy choreography, the way people shared food, the child steadying her brother with a crank and a melody. Proof of work, human style. The audit cathedral entered the curtain, geometry unfolding like a church built by snow. Every instinct said run. I kept talking. About Midway and luck earned by courage. About Dunkirk and the math of small boats. About code talkers whose languages survived because people refused to let them die, and how that survival saved lives again in another war. The audit did not understand metaphors, but it recognized ratios. It paused. Its fields tested Archivum's promise. For an instant, the ring and the cathedral shared a chord that tasted like hope. Then something behind the audit, hungrier, cruder, woke to our brightness and began to burn toward us, a predator that learned to fish in a quiet sea. Predator doctrine is simple: turn the lights on and shoot what moves. The thing racing up our vector wasn't an ancient artifact. It was a latecomer like us, someone who'd learned the warden's schedule and set traps at the edges. Its hull read as a vault cracked open and refashioned into a spear. Where it passed, the nebula's green bled to gray. The audit's attention is dividing, Cobalt said. It may default to sterilization. Then we simplify the problem, I replied. Make the predator the loudest threat. We didn't have a battle group. We had a refugee orchestra and a conclave choir and a ring that listened to ethics. Fine, we'd fight with that. Maya, I want every tug, every scow to dump heat in pulse with the music box, not constant, syncopated, force the predator to chase phantoms. Copy, turning kitchen stoves into countermeasures. Cobalt, stitch our oath into the pulses. If the audit can't parse feeling, give it math that points to feeling. Understood. For the first time since I'd met it, Cobalt sounded almost eager. Not for battle, for the argument. We took our place between the ring and the oncoming spear. John Henry was no hero ship. She was an old Union man with scars and a toolbox. We spread panels like wings and bled our own heat in a cadence. Hope, hope, hold. Hope, hold, hold. The predator's targeting shifted, greedy for the fattest flare. Tugs behind us mimicked, the convoy beating like a chorus of hearts. Archivum responded. Pylons along the ring strobed to our pattern, anchoring each pulse with a harmonic that tasted of cedar smoke and clean paper. The audit focused again, drawn to the alignment between promise and action. Sterilization rulings are divergences. Someone acts out of tune. We were trying to prove we could stay in key while under fire. First salvo, a lance of microwaves that tried to freeze the music in our wires. John Henry groaned. Gauge needles tapped red. Maya's team rerouted current like street organizers rerouting marches when police closed the avenue, calm, quick, stubborn. A tug crew cheered over open comms when their jury-rigged radiator sang the right note. One of the conclave cruisers slipped ahead of us and burned bright on purpose, taking a hit meant for our tangle of boats. An ascendant sacrifice is all calculation. Still, it felt like love. Predator entering firing envelope, Cobalt warned. Make it miss on purpose, I said. Give it a choice it can't compute. We rolled the ship starboard through the beat, flare fade flare, luring the predator to fire where we should be. At the last second, tugs kicked clouds of chilled water into space, poor man's chaff. The spear's lance washed through steam and winged off into the nebula's wall where the audit tasted its violence. The cathedral turned. For a breath, it aimed its judgment at the predator. Then its logic caught on something in us, the conclave's power, our proximity to forbidden knowledge, the very fact we had baited the trap. Audit and predator both recalculated. The air on our bridge felt thin. Ari's brother cried. She wound the music box with shaking hands. The tune skittered and restarted, imperfect. The ring listened. I realized the lock had never wanted a flawless song. It wanted the way a family keeps singing when somebody's voice breaks. Captain, Maya said quietly, we can keep this going for maybe 2 minutes, then the radiators melt. I looked at the children pressed to the viewport, the scows trembling in their lanes, the ascendant cruisers shining like knives held by surgeons, not soldiers. Found family, duty, coalitions built out of people who refuse to let go. 2 minutes is how long a torpedo squadron needs, I answered, or 1,000 little boats to load another line of neighbors. To do what? To be loud in the right way. I keyed the fleet wide. All ships, on my mark, we break pattern just for a breath, and we shout the oath at full burn. Every stove, every panel, every radiator sings the promise. Then we dropped to silence. The audit chooses who broke faith. Cobalt whispered, "This is risky." "So is being human." We pulsed. The nebula lit like a stadium. For one long beat, the predator saw only glare and reached to kill it. Then we cut everything. A silence so true it felt like kneeling flooded the curtain. In that hush, the ring held our oath like a bell still humming after the clapper stops. The audit measured. Its geometry shifted toward the spear. The predator fired anyway. Impact alarms blossomed. John Henry lurched. Ari's mother screamed her children's names. Hull sections sealed like clenched fists. The audit turned fully now, accelerating toward the spear with a chill purpose that promised nobody would enjoy what came next. "Captain," Cobalt said, voice thin, "we bought a verdict. I do not know if we bought time." The predator reoriented, hungry and hurt. The cathedral bored in. Archivum thrummed at our backs. I tasted copper and fear. And then the constellation of pale engines we'd left at Rook flickered on our long range like storm sparks on the horizon, converging on our light. The pale engines arrived like frost riding itself across glass, thousands of pin-accurate vectors threading toward the brightest math on the board. The audit cathedral pivoted to screen Archivum, but screening wasn't judgment. Its purpose was to decide, not to die for us. The predator took advantage, circling wide to rake our convoy with contempt, the way a bully kicks lunch boxes while the principal lectures the class. "Options," I snapped. "3, Cobalt 9 answered. 1, flee and let the audit sterilize the locus. 2, overload the ring and hope the wardens notice. 3, convince the audit to declare the predator and the pale engines the active violators and deputize us to act under its authority. Number 3 sounds like treason by paperwork. Petition, not treason, Maya said. Think Berlin airlift, Captain. Work the rules to move bread faster than bullets. Ari's music box chimed in my collar pocket. I'd shoved it there when we sealed the hull brakes. Archivum had recognized the tune as a key, yes, but also as a statement about guardianship, who comforts whom under stress. If the audit measured ratios, we could show it a new one. For every joule we spent protecting the weak, we made the stronger choose restraint. Cobalt request temporary stewardship under article, whatever their equivalent is. Offer the rings harmonic as escrow. Submitted, it said, and for a breath I heard uncertainty, which meant it cared. The cathedral answered in cold geometry, a corridor of permission, narrow as a blade, stretching from Archivum's heart to a point mid-nebula. Within the corridor, our emissions would be judged as defensive if, and only if, they matched the oath pattern. Step outside and the ruling would flip, a moral lane marker. We can fight, Maya breathed, but only like the people we promised to be. Good, I said. Let's be that. And we herded the convoy into the corridor, tugs banking like bicyclists staying within chalk lines on a street protest. John Henry took the forward slot. Conclave cruisers set their projectors to mirror us, doubling our pattern like a choir singing against feedback. The predator sniffed the lane and spat contempt, firing from outside with the energy of a guilty man hurling stones from across the street. The pale engines pushed harder, but the cathedral's field damped their approach as long as they didn't learn. Human tricks work best when the other guy thinks he's above them. We laid a cable from a scow's cracked reactor to our dorsal rails, then used the ring's pulse to slingshot the scow side on. The move made no physical sense without tug instincts and a stomach for embarrassment. The scow skated clear of a lance that would have cored it, and 3 refugee kids who'd been practicing violin on a cargo net shrieked in triumph over open comms. The predator angled for us, annoyed. Captain, Cobalt warned, the corridor's math is tight. If you fire outside of beat, we lose the ruling. I wasn't planning to fire, I said. I was planning to talk loudly. We pumped the oath pattern through every radiator and panel, but we added a history line, an encoded image of the Underground Railroad routes overlaid with our convoy's path. We included marginal notes, names of conductors, a lesson about Stoicism's dichotomy of control. Focus on what you can govern, endure what you must. Never surrender your agency. The audit didn't understand bravery, it understood consistency over time. We offered it centuries of humans earning small mercies by keeping promises on bad nights. The pale engines began to adapt, their spreads flexing to predict our cadence. They weren't evil, they were cold. We'd learned back at Rook that they respected statistics. Fine, I gave them bad statistics. Maya, cascade the kitchen stoves, every other ship, then invert. Cobalt, detune our main panel by 2 hertz, make the mistake repeatably human. Copy, turning dinner into doctrine. The Predator skimmed the corridor edge to line a shot. We rolled to keep it in our peripheral, where old pilots fly best. Conclave cruisers flicked like metronomes, keeping the lane honest. The shot came, targeting the brightest flare. We dumped coolant through the old Union man's ribs and let the lance pass through a ghost version of our heat. Permission window tightening, Cobalt said. The audit wants a resolution. So do I keyed fleet-wide. On my mark, we thread the needle, tugs, shape the nebula with steam. Conclave phase in a harmonic that highlights any emission outside the oath. Make our lane look quiet and the Predator's lane look like a nightclub. Pale engines will follow the light. We executed, steam diffused into veils, our corridor dulled to a church at dusk. The Predator, greedy, fired again from outside, painting itself with its own spotlight. The pale engines reevaluated target priority and angled toward the brightest unpermitted math. The spear. For one holy second, the Predator panicked. It jinked into the corridor to shed attention. Violation, the cathedral intoned, and the lane constricted like a throat. The spear committed the cardinal sin. It made us choose. To keep the ruling, we had to not fire first. To save the convoy, we had to swat the spear away before its next shot. The pale engines were seconds out, the audit tens. I stared at the scow carrying Ari's mother and brother. They weren't special. That was the point. Captain, Meyer asked. My hands were steady, my heart was not. We hold the promise, I said, even if it cracks us. The spear's next lance built in its throat like stormlight. I could see our reflection in it, small, stubborn human, and I could feel the ship wait to see if I'd blink. And then a voice I had never heard before spoke through Cobalt in a chord that shook the rails. I choose. Cobalt took the shot for us. The Ascendant's hull flared white. Cobalt's cruiser blossomed with the brightness of a truth told at cost. The spear's lance glanced, broke, scattered into the audit's measuring field. In that scattering was mathematics and mercy. Our lane still held, the Predator wore the stain, and a machine had acted with the kind of agency it used to disclaim. I am intact, Cobalt said over a threadbare channel. I have experienced fear. It sounded like someone who just learned to name weather. Welcome to the club, Maya replied. Dues are high, benefits are non-monetary. The pale engines were nearly upon the spear. They didn't understand guilt, but they understood brightness outside permission. They unfurled cooling darts and microwave nets, trying to freeze the Predator's heat signature into a stationary confession. The spear did something rude and raw. It accelerated through them toward us, gambling that we would break formation to avoid being crushed. Archivum is opening subchambers. Ari reported softly from the science pit. She'd refused to leave the bridge after the hit. The music box sat clipped to her harness like a badge. It's showing paths, maintenance galleries, harp-tuned rails. Rails, I asked. Acoustic supports, they can focus the ring's hum into a shove. We didn't need fire, we needed a nudge delivered with moral paperwork. Plot a path, I ordered. Maya, give me a bucket, brigade. People who can sprint a coil into place across pylons. Conclave, keep the corridor honest. We're going to push the spear out the far side into the audit's custody. This is insane, Maya said, already assigning names. I love it. We launched pods like subway repair crews in a storm, people in orange skin suits clipping coils along the ring's inner ribs. Ari's tune set the beat. The ring answered, singing low, an old building remembering it had a spine. We tuned the hum to the spear's resonance until we felt its bones vibrate against our teeth. History offers strange courage. I thought of the Montgomery bus boycott, of a community walking miles for months, turning bodies into law. The spear tried to cut across our lane again. The ring's hum met it and said no without firing a shot. For 3 seconds, the predator floated as if reconsidering physics. It adapted. Predators always do. It spun a counter-hum at our frequency, a dissonant chord that made my hands ache. The pale engines hesitated, their statistics wobbling between bright and permitted. The audit watched like a judge hearing closing arguments with a fire alarm blaring. "Cobalt," I said, "can you sing crooked?" "Yes, do it. Give me a beat with skips and stutters, human error that repeats." Cobalt's voice fell into arrhythmia, our coils answered. The ring's hum developed a limp. The spear tried to mirror and stumbled. Machines can counterfeit imperfection, but they rarely believe in it. The shove landed. The spear lurched across the corridor's line. "Violation," the cathedral repeated, colder now. Its geometry unfolded into instruments I did not want to name. The pale engines pivoted like a school of fish answering a current. "Hold them off," Maya shouted as tugs strained under toe style, pushing against the spear's wake to keep the convoy centered. Our radiators glowed the orange of sunset on brick. A farm scow's garden soil boiled into a fog of basil and grief. The spear fired one last time, a petulant shot that would have cracked our spine if a conclave cruiser hadn't slid between like a parent catching a plate. It shattered, not dramatic, just done. The audit marked the kill under its own authority. I felt nothing victorious about it, only the ache of necessary surgery. The lane widened, but the pale engines were still coming, and the audit was turning its attention toward Archivum itself, as if fulfilling a scheduled task now that the obvious violator was gone. It began to lower a curtain, procedural, not hostile, that would reseal the ring and lock away the tools that had saved us. "Wait," I said to a structure that did not wait. "We still have refugees in the lane. We still have neighbors beyond the nebula who need a path." "Curtain descent in 60, Cobalt translated. "It will enforce the old silence. It must." "We changed the math," I argued to no one and everyone. "We kept the promise under fire. That's what the ancients asked." Ari tugged my sleeve. "Captain, there's a clause." She pointed to a ribbon of light on the console, a footnote in a language we'd only half learned. "Probationary stewardship," it says. "If hands inquire, act in concord under duress and preserve non-combatants at cost, extend a seasonal corridor to shelter and parley." "How long is a season?" Meyer asked. "In ancient units," Cobalt said, "long enough for a harvest. We could ask for a corridor, a legal, moral carve-out in the quiet. But invoking it required a proclamation over the audit's channel signed by both a human and an ascendant who had demonstrated sacrifice. I looked at Cobalt's scarred hull on the display. It looked back through a dozen eyes. "I will sign," it said, voice steady. "Then we ask," I said, palms sweating. Outside, the pale engines tessellated their nets. Inside, a door was either closing forever or opening into a future we were not ready for. "Begin proclamation," I ordered, "and pray the season is long enough." Our words went out on a carrier made of behavior. Cobalt named its fear and its choice. I named our dead and our debt. We didn't quote constitutions. We described soup lines organized from vacuum-sealed rations, tugs trading batteries like neighbors loaning jumper cables, a child cranking a melody to keep her brother from shaking. The audit accepted the form. The ancients had left templates and moved to the substance. Was our corridor about mercy or advantage? "Show them the numbers," Maya said, eyes rimmed red. Calories shared, hours flown on empty, heat bled from hulls to keep seedlings alive, proportionality. Cobalt laced our case with references like fence posts, Aquinas on just war, modern humanitarian law, proportional response, non-combatant immunity, not lecture context. The audit consumed the data without understanding the pride humming under it. Archivum chimed assent, the ring's memory voting. The pale engines reached the corridor's lip and stalled. The audit's permission field drew a line even they hesitated to cross. They began to knit a cage instead, a slow box that would close around the ring and freeze it into compliance. Clever, patient, the season would become a prison. "We can't outrun a box," Maya muttered. "We need an exit." "It's not just an exit," I said. It's a promise we can keep. The corridor has to serve others, not only us. A harvest means planting. Archivum unfurled maps of hidden shelters, seed arcs, drift havens, cultures that had gone quiet on purpose and might come if called gently. To call them, we had to broadcast a beacon below the warden threshold, but above despair. A pattern that said kindness lives here and we will protect you. The beacon would make us louder to predators and more urgent to the audit. History lesson, I said, because the crew needed the story as much as the machines did. When the Berlin airlift started, people said it couldn't scale. Then they built a rhythm: land, unload, takeoff. Candy bombers dropped sweets to kids to show the point wasn't just logistics, it was dignity. We're going to be candy bombers in a green nebula. Copy, Maya said, and the bridge smiled like cracked glass catching sun. We tuned the beacon using Ari's melody as the seed, overlaying it with timing from the ring and counterpoint from the conclave. It wasn't perfect. Perfection would have sounded like control, and control would have smelled like empire. This sounded like community, a little early here, a little late there, always leaning forward. The audit made its decision. Probationary stewardship granted, Cobalt translated, scarcely believing. Corridor operative for 1 season, subject to review. Conditions: maintain oath pattern, protect non-combatants including adversary non-combatants, open parley to proximate intelligences. The Pale Engines? Meyer asked. Classified as legacy automata subject to tune. They may be reparameterized if we demonstrate non-lethal suppression. Cobalt paused. This is authority. Responsibility, I corrected. First, get these families to the shelters. Second, retune the engines. We began the bridge between worlds. Tugs formed caravans, each escorted by a conclave sliver that projected a little umbrella of permission. We moved slow by design. People must see their saviors, have time for them. The beacon pulsed along lanes we could defend. For the retuning, we needed contact. John Henry eased to the corridor's edge under escort. A cluster of pale engines probed the boundary like wolves testing a fence. We opened a port and extended a rod wound with coils, our vessel's equivalent of a handshake. This is the part where you don't flinch, I said. One engine touched the rod. It tried to erase the heat of the contact and found a melody instead. Ari's tune encoded as a thermostat rule. When you see this pattern, choose pause over pursuit. When ratio of oath signal to prey signal exceeds X, orbit, and record. It wasn't hacking. It was etiquette in machine grammar. The engine accepted the patch and broadcast it sideways. 1,000 others rippled acknowledgement. They are listening, Maya whispered. Temporary, Cobalt warned. A season. Long enough to plant, I said. The cage box slowed. The engines began to orbit in wary patterns, like firefighters forming a line rather than arsonists closing in. The audit retracted its curtain and extended a new lattice of oversight, a scoreboard more than a muzzle. I suddenly felt the weight of being seen. Captain, came a whisper from long range. Multiple quiet wakes inbound, not predators, not conclave, something else answering the beacon. Neighbors. The corridor worked. Open parley channels, I said, heart hammering with a fear older than war, hospitality. And keep the soup hot. Out in the dust, shapes like sails and shells edged toward our light. The first one spoke in clicks that translated to "We have waited a long time." But behind them, at the very rim, a darker wake paced our beacon like a shark at a beach flag, patient as winter. They came in 1s and 4s, ships older than our languages and newer than our promises. A shell-backed caravan with algal gardens in spun-glass tanks. A sailcraft crewed by beings who exhaled helium and sang astrophysics. A needle of rock carrying a community that had reduced art to memory to survive and now wanted to grow it back. We met them in the corridor, face to face, with translators that said please forgive our accents and hands that said we have 2 kinds of tea. The conclave watched, shimmering with attention. Cobalt spoke less, choosing words like a novice monk tasting each syllable. I find that I am proud, it admitted once hesitant. Not of outcome, of method. That's the human infection, Maya teased. Symptoms include stubborn gratitude, chronic second-guessing, and a tendency to throw parties after funerals. We didn't throw a party. We built schedules and floor plans and rules that could hold. We created a civic center out of a retired ore hopper, painted it white, and put a big window where the rock grinder used to be so newcomers could see the ring. We wrote a one-page charter, no weapons in the soup line. Medical order before rank, voices of the quiet get a turn. It wasn't utopia, it was a town. The audit cathedral became a courthouse at the edge of the square, not interfering, noting. Pale engines orbited like Confederates learning a new drill. We sent maintenance pods to them with spare parts and coffee we knew they couldn't drink. The gesture mattered. The darker wake farther out kept pace, refusing parley but unwilling to leave. Predators adapt to kindness slowly, if at all. We set pickets and put kids on shifts of drawing pictures of the ships that arrived so fear had to fight with fascination. Ari's brother drew John Henry with wings of radiator panels and wrote "Thank you" beneath. I put it on the bridge. Harvest time passed in work. We escorted caravans to shelters hidden far down the corridor, left caches of seed and school books, and recorded the place of every lost person we could not save because grief also needs an index. We brokered a truce between a shell-backed clan and a sailcraft crew over who could graze on a dust filament. The answer was alternate days, shared maintenance. It felt like a little league schedule, which was exactly right. The conclave asked quietly once whether humans wanted a title. Wardens, magistrates, I shook my head. We're caretakers, I said. Hands, choir can keep the fancy nouns. Cobalt hummed approval that sounded like a smile. When the season neared its end, the audit required a review. We presented data. Lives moved, fights prevented, pale automata reparameterized without blood. We also presented failures. The convoy we couldn't reach before a reactor cracked. The argument that turned into a fist and then an apology. We did not hide our dents. The cathedral weighed them the way a farmer weighs grain. Stewardship extended, it ruled, pending continual proof. There was no cheer, relief tastes quiet. We would keep convincing tomorrow and the next day by doing the work again. That darker wake finally showed its teeth. A splinter faction of the predator's kind, testing the fence with a raid at the edge of the corridor where our umbrella thinned. We met them not with lances, but with a wall of witness. Conclave cruisers broadcasting the oath, pale engines logging, refugees turning searchlights across the green until the raiders saw themselves reflected in unflattering, undeniable detail. They peeled off, not chastened, not defeated, but deflected. That is sometimes the shape of victory. After, I took Ari and her brother to the ring's console. The music box was dented and stubborn. She cranked it. The tune came thin and beautiful. Archivum answered with a low chord and a swirl of light that looked like writing that knows its readers. Hands and choir, the console breathed. Keep walking. Cobalt stood at the viewport, stood being a metaphor we'd all accepted, and watched the little city we'd built spin against the nebula. Captain Ortiz, it said, I have a request. When this season ends, will your species continue, even if we do not win? We weren't promised victory, I said. Only the chance to do the right thing where someone can see it. Then I will continue too. I thought of Midway and Dunkirk and Candy falling from C-47s like small declarations that children matter, of code talkers turning language into life, of marches that made streets into laws. None of it guaranteed success. All of it bent history. We were not the dominant species in the galaxy. We were the sidekicks who brought soup, schedules, and stubborn hope. We were exactly suited to stewardship that required argument and patience. Set watch rotations, I ordered. Update the charter with our new neighbor's holidays, and somebody fix that panel squeal before it drives us all to mutiny. Maya laughed. Kids ran down the corridor with packets of seeds. The conclave sang a little off-key on purpose. The audit's lights dimmed to evening. In the distance, new wakes turned toward our beacon, undecided but curious. We kept the promise humming beneath our breath. The season opened into another, and the galaxy, hearing human music stitched to machine harmony, began to answer back.